Hello friends, welcome to my YouTube channel. Today is Sunday, February 27, 2022. You are watching my 8th video. Our topic today is diplomacy. Before moving on to that, let me remind you that tomorrow is the second meeting of the opposition parties. I agree with most of the criticism that the opposition has been totally lethargic and ineffective. The most critical member of the table and the main target of the government is Meral Akşener. The main purpose in giving incentives to Tansu Çiller and now Ahmet Özal to establish parties is to divide the vote base of İYİ Party. Unfortunately, the opposition bloc ignores this fact. They develop no counter plans. What I want to emphasize here is that there is serious Abdullah Gül sympathy by half of the table. If Mr. Gül is sincere, let him persuade Melih Gökçek, who is struggling to re-establish a presence in politics, to found a new party of his own. Let's see if Mr. Gül is serious and sincere. Do you think leaders who are sympathetic to Abdullah Gül will be able to convey such a proposal to Mr. Gül? Turkey's weight in the world is roughly 1%. The population and economy average of the last 40 years is around this level. The current figures are around 1.1% in terms of population and 0.7% in terms of economy. In other words, the average world citizen is 50% richer than average Turkish citizen. It is not surprising that Turkey fell to the 21st rank among the world economies in 2021. These are the results of stubborn wrong policies in almost every field for the last 4 years. In 2022, we will descend to somewhere between the 22nd and the 24th place. Taiwan is certain to surpass. The economic performances of Poland and Sweden will determine the final ranking, based on the fact that we have a culture that prioritizes domestic politics and ignores the rest of the world. It is a romantic fantasy to expect this situation to get resolved by itself. The performance of Turkey's ministries of justice, foreign affairs, energy, agriculture, health, tourism and environment on top of economy management is far below the mediocre. It is no surprise that young people are eager to escape the country without looking back. The shallowness, simplicity and ignorant comments of artists and academics, who are considered to be the so-called intellectual segment, cause our young people to feel like choking in our country, because the level intellectuality is somehow capped or limited at the moronic level due to these self-important people. Efforts of a country to communicate and adapt itself with the rest of the world is called foreign policy or diplomacy. If our country's weight is 1% in the world, our relations with the remaining 99% are at least as important as the equilibrium or balance of domestic relations. This policy management, in which national interests are or should be prioritized, is to archive the history correctly and to extract the right messages and lessons from it, to analyze today's balances in line with national interests rather than emotions, and to produce strategies based on reason and experience in order to shape the future in line with the interests of the country, and try to ensure that these are put into practice. Unfortunately, there are very few bureaucrats with this mentality and talent left in the current foreign affairs staff today. It is not possible for me to produce an analysis that will yield a recipe for the solution to Russian invasion of Ukraine, which is currently the most important agenda item globally. The same is true for the vast majority of our country's politicians. In foreign policy, the rightness or wrongness of any decision cannot be understood before a certain time passes. Especially armed conflict environments are very slippery and extremely volatile. If there is even slightest possibility of being dragged into war at the table, the number one priority should be to avoid mistakes rather than doing the right thing. The only thing that is certainly wrong is to reach emotional, reactionary and definitive judgments. I am one of those who think that Turkey's current foreign policy seems suitable and appropriate for the situation at hand. Let's not forget that İsmet İnönü used many maneuvering and deception methods to stay out of the Second World War. There is a saying that all is fair in war. Better than that, everything is permissible or excusable to avoid a war. Standing upright, speaking harshly, taking a macho attitude are things that should never be done in such periods. For example, after the Russian plane was shot down, I gave that order. Arrogance is the textbook case for recipe for disaster. Foreign affairs and country administration are not child's play. It was the correct choice in the name of foreign politics that Turkey has abstained from voting to expel Russia from the Council of Europe. Diplomats of other countries, including Ukraine, can empathize this. It would also be wrong to rush to make a decision about passage through the straits, just like rushing on any decisions. When these events end one way or another, we will need working relations with both countries. It is the right behavior to insist on our request to be a mediator even if it does not yield any real-life results at all. International politics is not a place for personal ego fulfillment. Now this must have been learned from stubbornly repeated mistakes, especially when there is armed conflict at our borders. It is necessary to pay attention to everything that comes out of mouth. Wartime discourses and peacetime discourses do not necessarily need to be consistent. Those who do not understand what I have said should read Kissinger's book called Diplomacy if they wish, or they can read another book on foreign policy they choose. I recommend Onur Oyman's books on these subjects, especially his books called National Interests and Catching Up with the Future are treasures for me. Russia has followed a patient, opportunistic and ruthless expansionist policy for the last 500 years. The hypocrisy and unreliability of Western countries and their failure to keep their promises is not a new phenomenon. It is also not wrong in terms of their own country's interests. I reread Henry Kissinger's book called Diplomacy to prepare this chapter. Let me state that although I skipped it partially, I have read around 800 pages again. I saw that I would probably have to read it over and over again later. In connection with the conflict between Russia and Ukraine, many analyses have been published on economy, oil, natural gas, wheat, sunflower, tourism, defense industry, etc. It was seen again how visionary the Montreux Agreement was prepared. I will not repeat or summarize these matters. I recommend following these valuable analyses done by the analysts on the social media. A very difficult period begins for Turkey due to our close relationships and mutual benefits with these two countries. Unfortunately, Turkey is expected to pay the price for the grave mistakes made in the past medium and long term. For example, Russia seems to have increased its reserves against the sanctions following the 2014 invasion of Crimea, providing extra savings in the wealth fund and reducing its dependence on imports. Since our country insisted on all the mistakes it has made, it is estimated that Turkey will suffer losses at levels close to these two countries, almost like being in the middle of the war, without even getting involved in any conflict. In order to minimize this damage, there is nothing to be done at the moment except to hope that the government will act with restraint. Although very unlikely, I hope that the necessary lesson will be taken by the whole country when this chapter gets over. Like us, Europe will also suffer from current developments. American energy companies will finally be able to get permissions for shale gas exploration and fracking in Europe. The Pentagon will receive approval for increases in its budget, which hasn't gone up in 6 years. Public support is now obtained to increase the figure from $800 billion to around $1 trillion and to increase this figure year by year thanks to new members to be joined to NATO and new military bases to be constructed. Pentagon is often more influential in American foreign policy than the Foreign Affairs Department. The uninterrupted policies of provocating Russia are not accidental or coincidental. Although being Democrats president, Biden, like Obama, has been and will remain passive against Pentagon as well. The budget figure of Pentagon is so large that the entire annual economic production of Turkey is not enough for the Pentagon's annual expenditure. It would be wrong to see the Pentagon as only weapons budget. Almost all revolutionary technologies in the world have been implemented by the American Defense Agency, DARPA, like examples of nuclear technology and the first computer in the 1940s, and the Internet, which started with the name DARPANET in 1968. It is not easy to intervene, as these issues are way too technical for the politicians. Unfortunately, as a result, the Pentagon finds the opportunity to develop and implement its own design all over the world. Naturally, China will try to be the most advantageous out of this situation, exactly just like Stalin's negotiations and agreements made with Hitler before the Second World War. Even though Stalin and Hitler were at the exact opposite poles ideologically, there were periods when they were very close friends as two fascist dictators. As for today, Russia's weakening and isolation as a result of this conflict is most beneficial to China. China will be the world's largest economy after 2030 in GDP terms. For China to be a real superpower as well, it would be very appropriate to have unlimited access to Russia's resources such as land, mines, minerals, oil and natural gas. Russia, which has been completely isolated from the system as a result of embargoes and can only do foreign trade through barter or one-by-one approved schemes, is a unique opportunity for China. In the long run, Russia, Belarus and Chechnya will suffer the biggest losses. Therefore, the Western world and China will work hard to make Ukraine a second Afghanistan or a kind of Vietnamese swamp for Russia. China's support to Russia at the beginning to confront and invade Ukraine appears to be completely planned. It is very important that Turkey does not fall under the radar of this wounded and aggressive Russia. Let's not forget that after the Second World War, Stalin wanted to include not only the Straits but also all of Turkey and Greece into the Soviet Union. The reason why İsmet İnönü wanted to join the League of Nations and to get under the protection of the United States was to protect the country from Russian invasion. In fact, elections and a multi-party system, in short, democracy, was implemented in Turkey to meet the conditions and prerequisites to be eligible. Rural institutes began to be pruned back then, as they resembled communism, and domestic politics was redesigned to be completely anti-communist. It was during the time of Adnan Menderes to enter NATO and shut down rural institutes completely. But the whole process was initiated by İsmet İnönü just after the Second World War, due to the upcoming threat of Russia and Stalin. I didn't tell you this part for your liking or not. The main idea is in short. There is no joke with Russia and never has been. In summary, there is such a thing called international politics, unfortunately, and it is a very important fact of life. When done wrong, it can cause bombs to fall on your head. John Lennon wished that there were no countries and religions and that everyone lived in peace. He said it very well, but unfortunately he said it too early. He was shot and killed by a fan out of extreme love in front of his house in 1980, when he was just 40. In the short run, even if the emotions dominate human behavior, logic and reason win in the long run always. Diplomacy is just that. It is a job that should be done by cold-blooded, calm and patient people. Sometimes the fate of whole country can be on the table. I hope we as a country can get through this period without any accident. Thanks for watching. See you in the next broadcast. Goodbye. Broadcast. Goodbye.